Ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you. Just while the last few people join us, let me kick this session off because I've been instructed to go on time. You're very welcome to this session on 3 steps to better member engagement. My name's Francois Barker. I'm a member of the PLSA DC Council, and when I'm not doing that, I'm the head of pensions at the law firm Evershed Sutherland. My job is the easy one, although you might not think so with 4 panellists like this, to chair today's session. I'm very, very pleased to do so. And welcome to our web stream viewers as well. I think this is actually a session about 4, 3, 2, 1. We've got 4 great speakers, we've got 3 terrific initiatives, we've got too much to do in 50 minutes, and I've got 1 question for you, which I'm going to ask you on the web polling app in a moment, so please make sure that your phones are ready to go. Let me just start by introducing our speakers, and remember that you can ask questions on the conference app and you can tweet using the hashtag PLSA Annual. So my 4 speakers, to my left, Guy Opperman will need no introduction, did an excellent plenary session before lunch and Minister for Pensions and Financial Inclusion since last year. To Guy's left is Ruston Smith. Ruston is chair of the Tesco trustees and holds a portfolio of other roles and is very much the architect of the simpler annual statement, one of the initiatives we're looking at today. To Ruston's left is Yvonne Braun. Yvonne is Director of Policy at the ABI for Long-Term Savings and Protection, and Yvonne will be particularly talking about the dashboard. And to Yvonne's left is Nigel Peaple, who is Director of Policy and Research at the Home Team at the PLSA. I added up just before starting that I reckon between us we've got something like 90 years of pensions experience, so that's either a very good or a very bad thing. Okay, your question, yes, not all Ruston, I should say. The question for you then, please. Automatic enrolment is all about apathy. It's about doing things to people rather than people doing them for themselves. So my question to you is this, and you can answer yes, no, or not sure. In that environment, do you believe that tools to encourage saver engagement can have an effect in terms of increasing pension saving? So just take a moment to vote yes, no, or not sure.
How do we vote?
You don't, because you have a conflict of interest. Okay, so if we could just bring the result up now, please. Okay, so you have nobody who is not sure, and your job in the next 40 minutes or so is to convince the 4% of people, 5% of people who think member engagement doesn't matter. So in the context of that answer, Minister, perhaps I can turn to you first and ask you to say a few comments about the importance of member engagement, the role it can play, and something about the initiatives that we're talking about today.
So, thank you very much for inviting me. Apologies, I'm going to try not to repeat myself from the earlier speech that I gave today. I suppose we'd start with a couple of basics. Anything that makes it easier for the consumer to be more involved is a good thing. And I think there has been a problem under successive governments, successive regulation, and successive organisations that pensions has been inaccessible. It has been complex, it has been difficult to grasp, and people, putting it bluntly, have not engaged with them in a way that all of us would have liked to have happened. Now, there are a multitude of reasons for that, but I think that is changing. I think it's my country dancing partner here to my left has done a great job on simpler statements, and I'm a massive fan of those, but it seems to be self-evident. And I've seen the product of the user groups who have engaged with that, and I've seen videos of them actually saying, well, what does an old statement look like and what does a simpler statement look like? It is light years different in terms of their approach. So I can't overstate enough how much I think that is the right way forward. There is an issue as to whether we harmonise everybody. My personal view is that I would love it to be the case that everybody had exactly the same thing, so that on the basics that you should be universally understood and acknowledged. I'm looking also at the extent to which we learn lessons from Holland and Scandinavia as to whether you should make a big deal of whether it is the particular letter that you receive and how it is you do that on an ongoing basis. I suppose the second thing I'd make is that I don't regard it as a problem that on the one hand you have auto-enrollment, which is classic nudge theory based upon apathy, lack of engagement, and by reason of that you get up to 8% and potentially beyond. But on the other hand, we're all desperate for people to be more engaged in their savings and their pensions, because you're certainly not going to get the engagement without the pot to start with. And the only way you get the pot is through the apathy. That is patently clear. Everybody has tried umpteen things down the years under successive governments, and auto-enrollment and nudge theory is the only way you get this going. And I think get that started and then be in a position that you engage more. I think there is a genuine pressure upon the industry to then harness that engagement as they get there. And I resolutely believe that the stats on engagement in banking and finance and savings by reason of tech, as compared to 10 years ago, are just off the charts. They really are. Hands up who actually saw their bank manager recently. 1, 2 at the back, and that's probably because you've got dodgy mortgages, let's be blunt. Okay, I'm joking. But the truth is, you're not engaging with your bank manager in any way. But if it is in an accessible format on your phone or on your iPad, that you are going to engage with your bank and you are going to engage in savings in a way that is totally different going forward. So for my part, I think you can do both. I think it's definitely the right thing to do. And I think the business itself is changing dramatically. The tricky bit for everybody here is how do you make the tradition of pensions. You are going to need a simpler statement, but you're also going to need to make this accessible to an online data world. That's going to be difficult.
Okay, Minister, thank you. That's very helpful. So, Ruston, perhaps I can just turn to you. The Minister's talked about the statement and the importance of it. Your views on member engagement and the role that the simpler annual statement can play, and why and how it's come into being.
So first of all, I'd just say that it's critical that we engage with members, and it's a two-way conversation. It's not about us just telling them what they should do and they do it. It's down to us to take the initiative. So let's have a bit of context to the whole thing. This conference is about understanding savers. Now, all of you will know that the PPI estimate that we'll probably have around about 11 jobs in our lifetime, and 25% of us will have 14. That means we're going to have a lot of different statements from a lot of different providers. Problem today is, of course, if you look at them side by side, they're all very different. Different lengths, different words in different places, jargon taken from regulation in other places, different numbers in different places using different assumptions. So even if you get somebody who is really engaged and wants to do their very best, they're finding it really difficult. So consistency is the key. But the second thing with engagement is about keeping it simple. You know, when we talk about keeping it simple, we're talking about everyday people, not the people in this room. As Richard said yesterday, we're probably described as sophisticated savers. You know, people that I've worked with are not sophisticated savers. They're bright, you know, they've got intelligence, but they're not like us. So they don't need to know everything. So one of the key things we tried to do when we started thinking about a simpler statement was, let's understand the people, understand the savers. So the first thing is, anybody that's got children will probably know the statistic is that you've got less than 17 minutes to yourself every day. If you probably say that's a bit rich. Yeah. If you then think about too much information, the words, and I'm contributing to that, but also the stuff you see on the phone, on the television, on your laptops, every day it's equivalent to around about 34 gigabytes of data. So the truth is, we're all incredibly selective about what we look at and what we choose to read and engage with. So the starting point here was, what is it that really matters most to members? What do they really need to see to create the curiosity, the engagement, to allow them to start asking questions? Now, the answer wasn't pile everything into a statement of 33 pages, you know, with costs, charges, assumptions, this, that, and the other. The starting point is quite basic. How much have I paid in? How much might I have transferred in? What have I got today? And what might that look like when I get to retirement? then yes, let's signpost more information off the back of that. Because if they are curious and they do want that information, they have to get access to it. But do it in a way that if that's what they want, they can get it and they can get it easily. Don't sort of load it into the statement. And I thought actually it was quite interesting looking at the SDA Financial Lives survey from last year. It's quite telling. Because of those that did read the statement, for those under the age of 36, only 15% understood them. If you looked at the over 35s, that rose to 25%. But what a low base to start from. So I think actually, we're all very passionate about doing the right thing, but perhaps over-passionate and trying to do too much and trying too hard. So the point about the statement, quite honestly, is I started off with some great people, Mark and Vince from Quiet Room. I needed a lawyer, so we got Francois and Karen from Eversheds to keep me on the straight and narrow. And we decided actually to ignore the regulation and said to ourselves, what matters most to members? And we drew that statement up. And then we linked in, with regulators and said, kind of what's missing? Because actually, before Brexit came along, our sort of cunning plan was to say, this regulation's getting in the way. What we actually found is it wasn't. It's just that we had overcomplicated it. So we kept it simple, one-page statement, 2 sides, with some signposting to different information if people need it. And then we got Jeanette Weir to do some independent testing with users. So we had focus groups and we videoed it, as Guy said. And also we did some other testing with 1,000 people, different people, normal people. And overwhelmingly, they said, I'm much more likely to read this. And Jeanette did a test where she allowed them to read the statement just for 2 minutes and then took the statement away and asked them questions. And they could answer the questions that Jeanette gave to them. And it was the simple stuff, the important stuff. I know how much I've saved. I know how I've got. I know how much I might have. And then, interestingly, the conversation moved on. They started talking about, wasn't sure I was charged for my pension. And then somebody said, I didn't know my money was invested. And the reason I mention that is because, this is the start of the journey. This is the challenge we've got. And so the idea is, let's keep it as simple as possible. And when we start talking about the dashboard, my urge would be, don't try and boil the ocean. It's one step at a time. Do the stuff that really matters most. And let's really help members to engage. And let's have a conversation with them.
So Ruston Minister, I think today is the day that we officially launch this as an example of best practice.
It is.
So when your children and grandchildren ask you in the future, where were you, Mummy and Daddy? When the simpler annual statement was launched, you can say, I was there. I was in the room. Good. Ruston, you mentioned the dashboard, which takes us neatly on to Yvonne. So, Yvonne, tell us a little bit about the dashboard. You've been instrumental in driving it, where it sits in light of Esther McVeigh's comments a month or 2 ago, and what the future holds.
Thank you very much, Francois, and let me say what a pleasure it is to be here in Liverpool in such wonderful sunshine and with a room with a standing room only, which is extraordinary for a pension conference, so congratulations to the PLSA. So I'll be speaking about the pensions dashboard. A lot has been written and said about this in the last 2 years and also before, but I did think it was worth going back to basic and remind ourselves why this is actually so incredibly important. And as the Minister said already, we have a huge problem with pensions apathy. And I think that is illustrated very vividly by the research that the Pensions Policy Institute did for us, which we published yesterday, which showed that there is, and this is across defined contribution pensions only, there's just under £20 billion in lost pension money. And we all know why that is. People move, they move jobs, as you said already, they move house, especially younger people who rent. And they just lose contact with their pension, and often people don't even realize that they had that pension entitlement. And automatic enrollment, the wonderful policy that is, will only make that worse because it's an inertia policy and people aren't necessarily aware of what they will have. And such a mountain of pensions, lost pension money, I think, is not acceptable for us as a society. Ultimately, people will lose out as a result of that, and people's standard of living in retirement will be lower. So we believe absolutely incumbent on the industry to do something about that. And the current services are only taking us so far. The pensions tracing service is great, but you need to sort of know roughly what you're looking for, because you need to know your employer to be able to find something. But if you have forgotten that you ever had that pension in the first place, and you are now at your 10th job, then how will you actually find what you are entitled to? And that is why the pension infrastructure is, in our view, so absolutely critical, because it will allow people to use only very minimal information about themselves that they have, their name, date of birth, national insurance number, type that into the system, and then the system will find for them what they are missing. And I think that is absolutely critical to take pensions as a whole from what in some cases is actually the 19th century to the 21st century. And we know that user-friendly experience is actually incredibly important if we want to drive engagement. And there's a very, very neat example of that, actually. There was a recent trial by Scottish Widows and Lloyds Banking Group. And what they did was they showed a group of online banking customers who also happen to have a Scottish Widows pension, their Scottish Widows pension in the same window. And on the very first day that that was available, 50% of people clicked on that. And I think that tells you something. It tells you something about convenience and ease and how important that is. And in my view, that's a great example of the power of online systems. And the pensions dashboard would, of course, deliver that right across the board. And that's why we think this is such a crucial system to have, and why it is actually transformational. How do you make it a reality? We know that the technology is not the problem. The prototype has shown that this can be done. And what we now mean to deliver, I think, is a great collective effort right across pensions, whether they are trust-based, contract-based, defined benefit, defined contribution, whether they're in the public sector, whether they're in the private sector, or they're in the insurance and long-term savings industry. We know that that's too big a task to be undertaken by a coalition of the willing, like we did with the prototype. This really needs compulsion in legislation to make sure that those people who don't want to play ball, and also to give everybody an incentive to deliver. And we also need a governance structure that can legitimately have the confidence of the great British public that this is done, not on behalf of the industry, not on behalf of the private sector, but actually on behalf of people. And we, and I think PLSA as well, we stand ready to work with government to deliver that. We're all, of course, waiting with bated breath for the feasibility study. Briefly, on the simpler annual statement, I think, first of all, you really deserve our congratulations for all the work that you've done together with Eversheds and Quiet Room and Ignition House to develop this. And I think, as the research shows, simple annual statements are another important contribution to help improve engagement. We'll be taking this forward together with the PLSA to make sure that they work right across the board, and also that they work alongside other initiatives, so the pensions dashboard, the PLSA's retirement targets, and also some of the other requirements that have come in, such as the FCA's requirement for the new wake-up pack, because we believe it's really important that people have, if you like, a consistent journey right across the piece. So we think that needs to be looked at as well. And I think that's all that I wanted to say on dashboard and simpler annual statements.
Yvonne, thank you. So we've heard about the simpler annual statement and the dashboard. The third bit of the jigsaw, Nigel, is the PLSA's work on hitting the target. Why don't you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, obviously some people have already heard a little bit about hitting the target over this conference. So I'll just kick off with a few thoughts on engagement. It's very encouraging that 95% of people felt engagement can make a real difference. We think that too at the PLSA. But I think it's important to remember the financial capability challenge in this area. And again, in the last couple of days, there's been lots of stats quoted about that issue, and I've got a few more here. There's the 1/5 of people don't really understand their bank statement. 2/5 don't really understand how the impact of inflation on real incomes. And actually, only 1/3 of people have financial goals. And therefore, at the PLSA, we feel that engagement is important, but it also sits within other policy tools, and in particular, defaults, good governance, and of course, regulation. But on engagement, in our report from earlier this summer, we had a lot to say about the role it could play in helping people have a good retirement income. And at the top of that list was, of course, our retirement income targets, which I'll describe in detail in a second. The pensions dashboard as well, and Yvonne and I and ABI and PLSA have been talking about how we can work together to try and deliver that. We agree with the ABI and indeed the industry group that it is ideally there would be compulsion, and in addition the state pension would be on there as well, so that everybody can get a really good idea of their income. But whatever the government side of that, we're committed to trying to deliver that and make it work. And we also put in our July report the importance of the simpler annual statement, which is not up there, but you'll remember what it looks like. So the importance of the simpler annual statement. And we've been pleased to welcome the work by Ruston and his team today. There are other aspects of engagement that are really important, such as the midlife MOT, a great idea. I think it should somehow be rolled out. And it feels like we're at a bit of a key moment in terms of fintech and how that might actually revolutionise people's ability to kind of get a grip on their finances and plan for the long term. In our Hitting the Target report, we pulled out 3 principles of good engagement. One is that people really have to have a clear objective. Secondly, that it's very important that the circumstances of the individual are fully understood and that the communication is done in the right time. And it's on the first of those points, the objective, that I want to segue across into retirement income targets. Again, I expect you'll remember this if you were in the hall yesterday, but nevertheless, we know that only 1/5 of people say they have any idea of how much money they have to save for retirement. And half assume that the automatic enrolment rates are either the government recommended amount or enough to achieve a comfortable retirement. And I think everyone in this room knows that probably isn't the case. They're a very good start, but they're not either of those two things. And 3/4 of people, when polled, say, we think retirement income targets would help. And they even say would help us save more. Well, hopefully that's true. Targets. Now, we've been talking about this for about 18 months, and we've had extensive consultations with the wider stakeholder sector, but in particular with the pensions industry. And we had pretty much universal support for the idea of the targets. There's a real feeling that if we could just give people a kind of clear goal to aim at, that could kind of simplify the communications enormously. And we've now got the social norm that people save for a pension through automatic enrolment. And what we need to achieve is a social norm where people are actually talking about the amounts they've got and whether they're on target to achieve that. And we think that our retirement income targets idea will fulfill that objective. Now, we are currently doing a big piece of research with Loughborough University, who are the people who do the income standards for the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, so you may have heard of them. So we're doing a big piece of research with Loughborough into what should be the right levels for those targets. And in that consultation exercise, we discovered that everyone was pretty much in agreement. Probably one target is not the right thing because it's very hard to get it right for people of different income levels. If it's too high, it might put people off. If it's too low, it might not meet people's aspirations. So instead, we're going for a 3-target level. And at the bottom level, we're going with the existing minimum income standard, which is about £10,500. And then who knows where the middle and the upper ones will be. Those targets are based on a series of goods and services that people will need in retirement. And there's about 8 or 10 aspects like transport. And up there we've got basically home improvements and kitchens. And down there we've got, at the bottom there, we've got things about what kind of dining out would you like to do in retirement. And the people at Loughborough University are currently conducting 20 focus groups across the UK, examining what are people's ideals in the UK for a minimum, middling and high income in retirement. And they're going to bring all that stuff together to us around the end of this year, and we hope in the early part of 2019 to be able to launch those retirement income targets. So everyone in the UK will have a bit of an idea about the quality of life, the standard of living that you can get with a certain amount of savings. And we plan to link that into various calculators to make it easy to think, well, I'm here now, what more must I do now to achieve that target? So the next key step is basically, from our perspective, is early 2019.
Okay, Nigel, thank you. So lots of questions coming through on the iPad. I'm going to try and collect them together into challenges to each of the 3 things we've heard about that perhaps our panellists can then respond to. So on the simpler annual statement, should there be a cost line on it? Hasn't paper had its day? And will it use the same assumptions as the dashboard so it doesn't confuse everybody? So there's some challenges on the simpler annual statement. On the dashboard, will it be compulsory, even for the very small schemes at great cost? And on targets, how will they cope with variable income? So there's some challenges for each of the three there. And I'm conscious I'm asking 9 questions at once, but Minister, would you like to respond to those?
Well, I am pleased. Wow, okay, so simple analyst statement. Cost line, I'm going to defer to the experts on that. It is clearly something longer term. If we can harmonise as much as possible with dashboard, that would self-evidently be a good thing. I was writing down so many of your questions and I struggled to get it. I mean, if everyone else has got the other 9, good luck to them.
It's really about how they fit together and what are the challenges that you see to them.
So I do, listen, you asked a really good question as well, whoever asked it, which is, has paper had its day? Now, I am, although I'm a Luddite personally, I am a tech devotee. And I do feel, however, that you should be doing both. And whilst it is unquestionably the case that a mobile phone device has got to be the key going forward in so many different ways, I do really feel that the engagement and the trust that comes from a paper-based system will need to be done. I think you can drive down price by having a harmonised version on an ongoing basis, but I think you should be doing both without a shadow of a doubt. So I don't think paper has had its day, particularly for a vast cohort of the population who are still not tech savvy.
What about the dashboard? Does making it compulsory fit with the government's view that this is up to the industry to self-regulate?
We don't think it's up to the industry to self-regulate. I think that would be unfair. What I think we do feel is that this should be facilitated by government, but industry should lead the way. And I very politely but robustly attempted to kick industry into action in the speech and Q&A afterwards. And yes, government's got to do their thing. I fully get that, and that's a matter for legislation and the like. But at the same stage, industry's got to do its thing as well. And I would be exceptionally upset and disappointed if organisations would turn around to me in, hypothetically, this time next year, after everything's published, and say, oh, well, if only you'd told us we need to do X, Y, Z, and now it's going to take us 5 years to get from here to there. I get that it's going to take a while for some organisations, but one would slightly question why haven't they done it already. But at the same stage, I would hope that every single person who represents such an organisation has already started this process. Frankly, they should be doing it with or without a dashboard, would be my personal view. And on targets, I have to say I completely forgot the question. I'm sure it's very important and my colleagues will answer that.
That's a politician's answer, great. Ruston, so pick up some of the... Sorry, let's start with Nigel, because Nigel had to wait most last time. Some of the challenges to the...
Thank you for calling me your colleague. I was just going to pick up that point on the variable income and the targets, because that was it. How will it work with variable income? Well, the answer is, unlike the past, where people have tended to describe future retirement income in terms of their prior earnings, what this tries to do is describe a retirement income in terms of a lifestyle that you will get in retirement. And therefore it kind of works for anyone of whatever income, because you can see that you'll be able to see the lifestyle you will get. The linkage to the consequences of that, say, on your earning of your savings rate will vary according to the person. And that's why targets, but connected into fintech and calculators, is a kind of necessary coupling to make it work. And I'd hope that would be on the dashboard, and it's already in the case that with a simpler annual statement, there's the idea of signalling people to go and look at targets.
Can I just come in on retirement targets? Because I think absolutely there are some things that will be harmonised in a fintech data way. This, of all things, in my view, is something that absolutely cries out for accessibility on a mobile phone device. And there's no doubt, I have seen the data and I have seen the changes in relation to savings, that this has kick-started a totally different approach to those who are engaged on a fintech basis on savings. And I suspect that if you're able to do what you're trying to do in an accessible device, then that will genuinely change things.
A question, Nigel, just picking up some of the things you said in terms of standardised targets. One question coming in is, should they be regional? In other words, should the target be different in Glasgow compared to Surrey?
So we examined that both in the public consultation and in the later work with Loughborough University. And it turns out that apparently people's expenditure is pretty much the same in terms of what you can buy with your money everywhere in the UK apart from the London region, where it's more expensive and it's different. So actually we are researching 2 targets, one for the UK as a whole and then a sort of a toggle alternative for the London area.
Okay. So Yvonne, some challenges for the dashboard around compulsion. And whether it will apply right across the board, even for the smaller providers and schemes where it may be disproportionately costly.
So I think it's really important that the best is not the enemy of the good. So I think it would be nonsensical to say some very, very tiny schemes have a great cost to their members to connect to a pensions dashboard online IT infrastructure. So I entirely agree with that. But the vast majority of schemes, I think, need to be connected to deliver the comprehensive view that people really need and want. And the customer research that we did in the course of the prototype project was very, very clear on that. People actually accepted to see near enough what they had. And that's why we're very certain that unless there is compulsion, and as I said, that can be done in a pragmatic way, we're just not going to get there. Because there's always going to be another priority that's more important.
Okay,
Francois,
remember you heard it here
can
first.
I chip in on that?
Yeah.
So I do agree. I suppose there are 2 levers to pull here.
So one is the de minimis one and the other is the timing one.
Exactly.
Because longer can be given for the smaller, so it might be done as part of other natural systems changes and therefore to keep the cost down.
And in fact, a big bang is absolutely not advisable here. I mean, I think that is very, very clear. It could be phased in over a couple of years.
Or longer.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Ruston?
Yeah, thank you. My shorthand isn't quite what it was, but I'll try and remember the questions from 50 minutes ago. So the first one, in terms of the simple annual statement, it can be used online or by paper. Now, clearly, the future is really online because, again, going back to the PPI's research, it's all about teachable moments and also nudges. It's critical. Make this personal. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, my dream for this would be that, you're going to get wide industry adoption for the simple annual statement, and then it used as a foundation for the dashboard itself. So if we've got same words, same numbers, and in due course, based on the same assumptions, and it's in a language everybody understands, why would you not expect to see what you see on your statement on the dashboard as well? So straight across. Third point, costs and charges are critical. We need transparency, but what we need most of all is consistency, because when we looked at the research from the simple annual statement, people were asking questions, but also trying to come to their own answers to those questions and getting them wrong. And that's very easy to do in the way we present information. So I think the critical thing is, let's make sure it's simple, it's consistent, so if you're comparing one statement with the other, you can understand it. And then make sure that it's in a way that people can understand and make proper informed choices. In terms of the statement today, there is no requirement on the physical statement itself to include lines on costs and charges, but there is a requirement to sort of signpost it to a website that's available to the public so it can be seen. And that's done at the fund level. So if you've got different types of asset classes, it's in that, and it's based on the typical charge for each of those funds, and that's the way it's presented, but obviously in pounds and pence. But I think, this is the start of a journey, and what I really hope, again, with the ABI and PLSA's support on this, taking it forward, is that, we start a really intelligent conversation that everybody understands with people, and let's have a conversation as opposed to just telling people they need to be thinking about engaging. This is a two-way thing, not just a one-way thing.
Clearly, everybody wants me to give lots of information about dashboard. I understand that. I think there's a couple of points I would make, which I hope will help, which is clearly I've had dozens and dozens of representations from a variety of different organisations. And certainly the overwhelming feeling is don't do a giant Big Bang Theory. And the second thing I think is that there is a very strong argument that there has to be some de minimis approach that we would at the very least park to start with to consider at a later stage. That's not saying that's what we're definitely going to do, but that's certainly been the weight of the representations on those two issues that I've received.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to pause there. I still have more questions on the iPad. I've got some of my own. Let me just invite anyone in the audience who may want to ask a question live, as it were.
There's a lady there. You
Yep.
just shout, there's a lady there.
You just say who you are and where you're from. That would be very helpful.
Yes, of course. It's Brian Henderson. I'm from Mercer's. So I applaud a lot of what I'm hearing today. It makes a lot of sense. And just as I was going through this, I was thinking, how do these three initiatives fit in with the self-employed and those in the gig economy? How do we include them and make it inclusive?
Okay.
Great
Good
question. Minister, perhaps to start.
Do you want to do several together? And then
Can
we'll
do. So there's a lady here,
Self-employed gig economy.
and there is another one, I think.
Hello. I was just wondering, when you were talking about the simpler annual benefit statement, whether you could incorporate information on sort of social and environmental impact to kind of better engage people on the sort of the real world impact of their money. And then I had a second, which may be slightly related to the previous question, which is about the sort of feasibility. I was just wondering, listening to you talking about the feasibility of people carrying their pension with them when they move jobs, so they just end up having one pension rather than pots in different places. I know that's a kind of ongoing debate.
Thorny political issue. Let's take those first. So, Minister, if you kick off, and then Ruston, perhaps
Me
on
again.
Yep.
So I'm going to be robust and say I don't think you should have social and environmental impact on simple statement, because where does that end? Because what you should have this, you should that. I think the whole point that it does what it says on the tin. Super simple, but signposts. And I would absolutely deprecate that. I think you should avoid that very definitely. I most definitely am not going to get into a debate on whether pot follows member, and nor is that something that we're going to do right now. I think many people would say that we have a huge amount of change in the pension system at the present stage. I don't rule out anything, of course, but it is certainly the case that I'm not proposing to address that at the present stage, and I think it would be wrong to do so at a time of genuine change. And as I think I tried to make the point in my Q&A, I see my job as delivering whole, very serious change on a multitude of levels by approximately end of 2019, summer 2020, and then everybody taking a big pause to catch up, basically. There are then a series of decisions that can follow thereafter, particularly once we get to 8%, particularly once you get super funds getting big and things like that, consolidation. But for the present purposes, I don't believe that is the right thing. On self-employed, we're doing a huge amount. Sometimes it doesn't appear so, but we're doing a huge amount to try and get self-employed on auto-enrollment. Really difficult. Let's be blunt about that. It is seriously difficult unless you can have drop-down boxes on automated digital tax returns, and unless you can have nudges in particular ways. However, and it's a very brave pensions minister who turns up at a pensions forum and then starts praising individual companies. But there are some companies who are doing pensions for the self-employed, who are genuinely engaging in this space, and who are doing it in an automated way, and more power to them. And I think, in my view, it's really simple. If I was running a business, I ran a few in my time in the past, I would simply say this is a massively growing market, and there aren't that many massively growing markets out there. And the pension providers who can come up with a probably automated online way for the self-employed to engage, first of all, in savings, is the obvious thing, which is what all the money boxes of this world are doing like mad. And then more particularly into long-term savings / retirement, will genuinely do very well and are doing very well already. And I've met many of the companies who are doing this in the space as well at the present stage. And I think there is, we are clearly going to have to do more on this, but without a shadow of doubt, we are going to do it. And there are some companies out there doing it. The ones I'd say this also as a challenge. You know, if you want change, look in a mirror, in my view, because if you want to change things, then ask yourself, why as a business are we not doing this? The traditional approach of pension companies to the self-employed, have we gone, has been too complicated, too small, not a big enough market, too volatile, not necessarily the sort of nice blue chip clients that we really want to see. The world is changing. The growth of self-employed, the growth of the gig economy is going to get much bigger. We're all going to be working flexibly much more. And we need to adapt to that. And the companies that do here, in my view, will do very well.
Ruston, Yvonne, Nigel, why don't you say a few words about how your own initiatives, or the initiatives you champion today, fit with the self-employed and the gig economy? Nigel,
just quickly. So as you know, targets already exist in Australia, and people apparently stand around the barbecue talking about how they're doing for their retirement income. Move this to the UK. Picture the people huddled inside the kitchen, looking out at the barbecue smoking under the rain, and it can work here too. For the self-employed, the targets work perfectly well, especially if everyone's talking about them. They've got a clear idea of the lifestyle they'll have in retirement.
Great. Yvonne?
I think on Dashboard, that has universal application. So it's not for automatic enrollment workplace pensions only. And I think we will see, in quite short order, I think, a world where we have wider wealth dashboards and people know about their pension savings, their liquid savings, their ISAs and so on. It's all going to be online. And I think that's how many, many self-employed people want to interact with their finances anyway. We did a tech sprint for DWP and Treasury earlier this year on the self-employed, and there was a real big appetite, I think, for liquid savings in particular, and ways in which, especially for gig economy workers, you link up the platform that they are using for their work together with a wealth or savings provider over here, and you do it all. You swipe your money, across in one smooth movement over to your savings. I think we'll see a lot more of that, and we'll see a lot more ease, and I think that's really what we need.
I'm not quite sure why the ABI did a tech sprint in a nightclub in Hoxton, but it was a very enjoyable experience, I have to say.
It wasn't a nightclub.
It was a former nightclub, I think. Yeah.
A former nightclub, right, okay. And Ruston, on the simple annual statement.
So very simply, the simple annual statement works whether you're employed or self-employed, whether it's paper or whether it's online. But the preference, of course, is online. That's the future.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Lady down the front here, please.
There's a lady there with a hand up.
Yeah.
In the spotted outfit.
Just a quick one for the Minister, if possible. Do you think that 2019 is still a possible date for the dashboard to be launched?
Okay. That lady there as well. Oh, she's all right. I've answered her. Okay, that was the easy one. Well, put it this way, we're doing the feasibility study soon, and I realise that in parliamentary language, soon can stretch, but I certainly think that there is much that we can be doing in 2019, yes.
And Yvonne, from your perspective, agree with that?
There's much we can be doing in 2019, and I think one of the things that we really, really need is clarity about what sort of entity or governance entity is actually going to be responsible for example, commissioning the IT infrastructure, setting the data standards and all the rest of it. And I think all of that can be set up, but I don't think it can be set up in a room completely without DWP involvement. It needs some sort of government blessing, I think.
Let me try and help without revealing everything that I'm not allowed to. No, I realise that you understand I'm not allowed to. But I think there are so many moving parts to this. And anybody who's looked at Dashboard, everybody's behind the project. Everyone agrees that the principle is absolutely simple. But there are an awful lot of moving parts. My urging is, there's an awful lot that industry can do disregarding government. I've made that point repeatedly. Governance is really complicated. And I've got to solve that. That's my problem, without a shadow of a doubt. But I then got to solve it in a way that this room and ABI and PLSA and others are happy to and can live with. Because there's no point me setting up the Milk Marketing Board being in charge of Pensions Dashboard, because everybody wouldn't then engage with it. So I've got to come up with the right governing structure that is sufficiently appropriate for what we're trying to take forward. That is not easy, I can promise you. I'd love to say that's really easy, but when we created Flood Re, there was a process to that, and that took a long time for a justifiable reason. Open banking have been wrestling for things for some considerable period of time. If you want models for what we're trying to do and how we're looking at doing it, those are two examples, amongst many, to be fair, where government has said we're going to do this particular project, but this is how we're going to have the management of the structure going forward. And I think that process, I'm very hopeful that we will have resolved relatively soon.
Okay, I can't help but think 2019 starts in 10 weeks, so there's a challenge there for you, but
Chill.
it finishes in 62, and maybe that's what we're aiming at. So we've got time, 3 or 4 minutes, for a couple more questions if anyone wants. Otherwise, I've got a couple on the iPad. Can I tempt anybody to raise their hand? Apparently not. Okay, so let me ask Yvonne a question that came in on the iPad around online security. If the dashboard is online and Facebook can get hacked, how do you protect dashboard data from scammers?
It's absolutely critical that data security is at the very, very top of what we think about. We're very clear that what you absolutely don't want to create is some sort of enormous data lake that just sort of sits there. So in our view, the data needs to flow from the pension schemes, if you like, through the metaphorical pipes to dashboards. But I mean, I agree, IT security will be one of the absolute key things that need to be sorted, and I would expect quite a lot of money having to be spent on that. And that is entirely right and proper, because we need to protect the data of the great British public.
Okay. Nigel, quick question for you around the baskets that you're going to construct for comfortable and modest and minimum. How are you going to do that, and how are they going to keep pace with evolving changes in lifestyle?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we're using the national experts on looking at baskets of goods and how people spend their money. And they do this by having extensive market research, as I said, 20 focus groups across the country. And they also talk to some experts about certain kind of baselines about nutrition, for instance, and heating costs to make sure that the estimates are realistic. Now, in terms of keeping them up to date, the idea is that there's a minimal review after 2 years and a full review after 4 years. And that's the way that it's currently done for the Joseph Rowntree Foundation Minimum Income Standard, and we could see that as being the same for these upper 2 levels.
Nigel, thank you. And then Ruston, last question for you, which is how does the simpler annual statement fit with what is already going on out there as best practice? Some of the bigger schemes in particular are doing some quite imaginative things. Are you saying stop that and do this, or not?
Good question. So inevitably there are some excellent statements out there, and providers have just implemented them, and they're also being implemented at the moment. So I see this as a journey. I keep coming back to 2 things. For the savers, keep it simple and let's keep it consistent. So, you know, my aim, my vision for the future is that over time there would be widespread adoption by the industry, and therefore at some point in the future, hopefully at the same time as having the dashboard, you get 3 or 4 statements. They look pretty much the same. They'll be branded differently. They'll be coloured differently. But actually it's the same words, same numbers, using the same assumptions in the same place. We've always got to bring it back to savers, doing our very best for them.
Great, thank you. So we are virtually out of time, so I'm going to call a halt now. Can I just finish by thanking our web stream viewers, by thanking you for your participation. It would be a lot harder without the questions on the iPad, but most particularly, could I ask you to thank our 4 excellent speakers.